Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beer Banter. My name is Matthew.
And I'm Mike.
Today we have an exciting collaboration beer to review. We're going to talk about and review the Brux Domesticated Wild Ale by two West Coast breweries, Sierra Nevada and Russian River Brewing Company.
Yes, this is a beer we've both tried before, and I'm very excited to get into some detail on the ingredients and the process of this beer. The name Brux comes from one of the strains of yeast used in this beer, Brettanomyces bruxellensis. Throughout this banter, we will shorten the name of the word to Brett, as much of the brewing community uses. Because the yeast strain accounts for so much of the character of this beer, we're going to make it the focus of our conversation today.
Yeah, that's right. First we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Brettanomyces. And then we're going to get into some of the characteristics of the yeast and how it's incorporated in the brewing process. We'll round out the discussion by explaining how these characteristics are specifically incorporated in this beer.
So first, throughout history, Brett likely infected most beers to some degree. This is mostly because there was no scientific understanding of microorganisms. A man by the name of Emil Hansen was one of the early microbiologists who pioneered the education of microorganisms in breweries. Since then, brewers have tried to eradicate Brett from their breweries and their beer. But now, a growing number of craft breweries are attempting to isolate and control this less predictable organism. This is with the hopes of producing beers that harness the unique flavors of Brett, making it a blessing instead of a curse.
Yeah, so let's start with how the yeast first came to be recognized and used in the brewing process. The name Brettanomyces is a Greek word, which translates to the British yeast. This is because Brett was first found in many beers throughout history, and one of them being the English stock ale. So although Britain is where Brettanomyces kind of got its name, it's not the only country where it was traditionally found.
Certainly not. Belgian tradition also holds styles that famously use Brett. Styles such as Lambics, Flanders Reds, and Oud Bruin are still widely enjoyed by beer enthusiasts all around the world. From Saisons to Trappist Ale, some traditional renditions of these styles may use Brettanomyces. Famous use of Brettanomyces is in the Trappist beer Orval as its bottling conditioning yeast.
So let's talk about what Brett does in beer. There are four main components or byproducts of Brettanomyces. There's volatile organic acids such as acetic acid and ethyl acetate. There's esterases, tetrahydropyridines, which give off the mousy character, and it's prevalent volatile phenols, which give off the spicy barnyard horse blanket flavors.
Mm-hmm. It's important to note that brewers will try to accentuate certain flavors of Brett while restraining others. For example, a brewer trying to create a beer with more wild character might want to accentuate the barnyard flavors while restraining the tartness of acetic acid. In this scenario, the brewer would want to avoid as much oxygen pickup as possible to restrain the creation of acetic acid while still having plenty of funky phenols.
Microbiologists have identified 5 different species of Brett. The most common species used in the brewing process are Brettanomyces bruxellensis and Brettanomyces anomalus. Both of these have different subspecies, and which have slightly different characteristics. Brett Brux also includes a subspecies called Lambicus, which is a subspecies often found in, that's right, Lambics. Brett anomalus was originally isolated from the British ales, and it has a slightly more subtle than Brettanomyces, or bruxellensis.
All right. Well, not to this beer in particular. The collaboration beer is crafted after a Belgian-style ale, sitting in at 8.3% ABV. The bottle tells us that the beer was fermented in the bottle with Brettanomyces bruxellensis. That means this beer underwent a primary fermentation using a Belgian strain of yeast, and then Brett was added to the beer as it was bottled.
Yeah, this yeast is going to utilize larger sugars that were not being able to be fermented by the Belgian strain. These larger sugars will provide the re-fermentation. This fermentation will produce the carbon dioxide used for the beer's effervescence. When using Brett in a bottle conditioning, it's general rule of thumb, the longer it sits in the bottle, the more funk it's going to have.
Funky. Let's get down to Funky Town.
Yeah.
So, as we're pouring this bottle, it's an important thing that I want to note for when you're pouring a bottle-conditioned beer. There will often be sediment in the bottom, so you're going to want to try to level the bottle off and do as much as you can of a continuous pour. And so what that's going to do is it's not going to stir up the dregs that are in the bottom of that bottle, and it's going to make the beer that we're pouring into our glass as clear as possible.
And this is the bottom, the yeast that's sitting on the bottom of this is Brettanomyces bruxellensis. So what some people could do if they were interested in capturing or harvesting this yeast, they could actually pour the remaining ounce or two, kind of swirl that beer in there, pick up the rest of that yeast, and utilize it in maybe a homebrew. I'm actually going to be taking the dredges and putting them into some wild, some funky cider we got going. So with this was been cellared for, I don't know, last 2 months maybe.
2 months, yeah.
And you can probably tell a little bit by the color. It's crystal clear. I mean, it is brilliantly clear.
Absolutely. Aside from a little bit of the sediment from the yeast, the beer itself is brilliant.
Yeah, I'm getting lots of tiny bubbles coming up from the bottom of this glass.
That's our dog saying hi to everybody. The head, very effervescent, gone within seconds.
Yeah, it kind of it's generally it's a pretty white, slightly off-white head. Large bubbles, dissipates rapidly.
Deep golden color to almost a light copper almost.
I get some sweet bread, but it's really followed through with the funk.
Yeah.
I'm getting barnyard flavors. Almost like a little soft straw.
Yeah, and some fruity esters from the Belgian yeast as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the funk really comes through right away for me at the beginning of this beer. Pretty easy to tell that it's a Belgian-based beer.
Yep. Very dry, too. This makes sense because the Brett yeast, the sugars that were still unable to be fermented by the Belgian yeast, were left over and the Brett chewed away at them, and it gave us this brilliant, nice firm carbonation, but it also kind of is drying the whole beer out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, clean. I mean, just it clean in the sense it's got the funk, but it's got this really dry finish. When it ends, it kind of ends. I get a little bit lingering of kind of the some of that almost mousy flavor, that
Sure.
little bit of funk.
For being an 8.3% alcohol beer, it's fairly light-bodied too. Going back to the dryness that you talked about, it's got a very crisp finish. There's not, as far as the mouthfeel goes, you don't taste a whole lot of the residual sugars in there.
Which is interesting because generally the sweetness will help balance out some of that alcohol warming. And when it's drier, the alcohol is going to showcase a little bit more. I think it's there, but it's very, very well balanced and put together. I get a little warming on the finish, kind of the top of my tongue, but it's not. It doesn't seem quite as boozy as it might.
Another thing that is would be nice to talk about when we're talking about wild ales, beers that use Brettanomyces. A lot of times, beers that get into the sour beer category, our Brett gets lumped in with that category, which is not necessarily the case because Brett itself is more of a funkifying agent rather than a souring agent. It's often used in combination with Pediococcus or lactobacillus, but in this case it's not. And you can taste this beer is not sour at all. It's definitely funky, but it doesn't have that acidic tartness that you get when beers have lacto or Pediococcus.
Yeah, Mike, you nailed it. Not a sour ale. Funky.
Definitely wild.
I mean, what do you think if you were going to give it a rating 1 to 5?
A 1 to 5. So on, I guess I'd have to break it out into category. For beer clarity, I'd say it gets a 4.5. If you're able to decant this beer and keep the sediment out of it, it's a brilliantly clear beer. I think as far as in experimentational style, I think it's really fun. I really enjoyed the way that they balanced the funkiness of the Brett with the sweetness of a Belgian ale and the phenols from the Brux, the way that they balance them with the phenols of a Belgian yeast. It makes for a very approachable beer, especially at 8.3% ABV. I had a lot of fun with it. I love Brettanomyces, but
yeah, you should come out or try to find it. I've had it for, I think I've seen it on the shelves for about a year now, but The two breweries are outstanding. Probably the best two breweries. Could be arguably some of the best two breweries in the world.
Yeah.
Sierra Nevada has just been killing it over in Chico, California, since the early '80s, and Russian River is pioneered some of the sour ale.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's
absolutely.
Vinny's been one of the leaders of doing traditional sour beers, going over to Belgium, understanding how they incorporate the microorganisms and doing it a little bit of the classic way. I think when they put domesticated wild ale on there, they've definitely taken isolated strain of Bruxellensis and incorporated it very strategically in their bottle conditioning, dosing and everything, their pitch rate. So it comes out very. I mean, this is one that you could get year after year, and it will still probably be done similar.
I feel like this is a great beer for people who are interested in exploring wild ales because it is remarkably approachable. It's done very well. It's done by professionals. It has that funkiness, but it's been managed and studied in a way that presents a very well balanced beer.
I think it's reach. This beer, because it's in collaboration with Sierra Nevada, it's been able to be transported probably most of the country. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks again for joining us for another Beer Banter.
We'll see
As
you next
always,
time.
Prost.
Prost.